After nearly 10 years of explaining Star Wars online, I've come across the same questions again and again. Today I'm going to try to answer as many of them as I can in one fell swoop. We've done A New Hope, we've done The Empire Strikes Back, so now here are the 40 most frequently asked questions about Return of the Jedi answered.
I assure you, Lord Vader, my men are working as fast as they can.
How was the second Death Star built so fast? The first one took 20 years, but the second was built in only 4? The only reason it took so long to build the first Death Star was because the super laser technology hadn't been developed. Of course, constructing the battle station itself was a massive undertaking, but the Empire had the resources to do it. The book Catalyst by James Luceno goes into the difficulties met by Orson Krennic, and we see the delay caused by Galen Erso when he learned his research was being used to create a planet killer. His time in hiding stalled development, and even when he returned, it took several more years to build a functioning weapon. The second Death Star began construction almost immediately after the destruction of the first. While it certainly wasn't convenient for the Empire to build another superweapon, it still had the resources to do so, and this time it didn't have to wait for Galen Erso's research, so they were able to build an operational, albeit incomplete, Death Star in only 4 years.
I tell you, this station will be operational as planned.
How is the second Death Star different from the first? What improvements did Moff Jerjerrod make to the design? According to Jerjerrod's story in Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View, the new superweapon's design exceeded its predecessor in size, power, and efficiency. Star Wars Legends says the second Death Star was 125% larger, and its super laser was able to recharge in only 3 minutes, compared to the first iteration's 24-hour recharge time. But the most important change Jerjerrod made surrounded the thermal exhaust port for obvious reasons. Thanks to Rogue One, we know that Galen Erso built a flaw into the Death Star's main reactor. Any explosion in any of the reactor modules would set off a chain reaction that would destroy the entire superweapon, and maybe the only way for a torpedo to reach a reactor module was through the 2-meter-wide thermal exhaust port. For the second Death Star, Jerjerrod removed the single larger port and replaced it with millions of minuscule tubes that stretched from the core of the station to the surface, allowing heat to escape. He also built what he referred to as choke points and fail-safes into the system to prevent any chain reaction from reaching the main reactor. Unfortunately for him, none of that would matter if Rebel pilots could simply fly to the center of the station, but I would say the blame for that falls on the Emperor, who prioritized the Death Star's weapon systems over its infrastructure. What are the spider-like droids seen wandering around Jabba's palace? They're known as Bomar monks. They were organic beings who believed they needed to remove all physical sensations to achieve enlightenment. So they took their brains out of their bodies and placed them in jars, which were then attached to those spider droid things. Jabba's palace was originally a monastery for the Bomar order, but since they were just walking brains in jars, the building was taken over by a bandit named Alcara, who was eventually driven out by Jabba. After his death, it passed to Bib Fortuna and then Boba Fett. All of the monastery's owners felt no need to force the Bomar monks out, and they were allowed to stay. Why did Boba Fett seemingly sit around at Jabba's palace for an entire year between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi? Sure, he often worked for the Hutt, but he didn't have an exclusive contract and was in high demand as a bounty hunter. The Star Wars comics set in between episodes 5 and 6 show us the re-emergence of Crimson Dawn, a rival criminal syndicate to the Hutt clan. They had kind of a grand reopening party surrounding the theft and auction of Han Solo's carbonite slab. Orchestrated by Kira, her stunt was meant to throw the criminal underworld into chaos, and she absolutely succeeded. The Hutt Council was slaughtered, leaving Jabba as the sole survivor, and the rest of the syndicates went to war with one another. Jabba was nervous and basically hiding on Tatooine, so when Boba Fett finally recovered and delivered Han Solo, he promised the bounty hunter more credits if he stuck around. Fett correctly guessed that the Hutt wanted protection from Crimson Dawn and agreed to stay after being handed a large sum of credits. How did Leia get her bounty hunter disguise? Forces of Destiny shows Leia, Chewbacca, and R2-D2 traveling to Ord Mantell to meet with Maz Kanata, hoping she could help them free Han. There, they were attacked by the bounty hunter Bausch, who they incapacitated. Maz suggested the armor was just Leia's size and would be the perfect ruse to gain an audience with Jabba. Later, Leia donned the armor and posed as Bausch in front of the Trandoshan bounty hunter Bossk. She pretended to kill Lando Calrissian and publicly staged Chewie's capture to build up the legitimacy of her claims in Jabba's palace. Does Max Rebo have arms? I guess it depends on which action figure or Funko Pop you're looking at, or rather, whether you're talking about Star Wars canon or Legends. Legends stories and merchandise tend to show Max with 2 arms and 2 legs standing inside of his red ball organ, but the original design for Max had him sitting on a cushion playing music with his feet. That initially got lost in translation, and so Max Rebo and the rest of his species were presented with 4 limbs. More recently, it would seem that canon stories have made an effort to honor Phil Tippett's intent, giving the character 2 legs and no arms. That said, there still have been moments in canon where the 4-limbed version can be seen. Does Luke force choke the Gamorrean guards in Jabba's palace? There is evidence for both yes and no. The script for the film doesn't say anything about the guards choking, but the novelization does, saying that they clutched at their own throats, gasping and choking. The film itself shows both guards going for their throats as well, but you can find mentions of the event in books like the Thrawn trilogy, where Luke remembers simply using a mind trick to befuddle the guards. So what's going on here? My best guess is that the original intent was for Luke to use the dark side to choke the guards. His big character arc for the movie is ultimately rejecting the dark side to become a Jedi, but at the start of the film, that's all up in the air. As the story developed and George Lucas decided to change the title from Revenge of the Jedi to Return of the Jedi, he may have dialed back some of Luke's actions. So the force chokes may have turned into some sort of mind trick, but the choking did still make it into the novelization, which included other drop details like Owen originally being Obi-Wan's brother instead of Anakin's. So I guess I would say that officially Luke does not force choke the guards, but I do kind of think that's what was filmed.
You will bring Captain Solo and the Wookiee to me.
What was the actual full plan to save Han Solo from Jabba's palace? I've been waiting for the Star Wars comics by Charles Soule to answer this more directly, but at the time of making this video, we're close, but not quite there yet. So here's my best attempt at a guess. First, the comics show us the cyborg bounty hunter Bylert Valance removed a massive battle droid from Jabba's security forces to make rescuing Han a little easier for everyone else. I think Lando was sent in undercover to do some recon. C-3PO and R2-D2 were then sent in to first give Jabba a chance to do the right thing, but also to sneak Luke's lightsaber in. Then Leia was sent in to try to covertly free Han. When that failed, Luke entered to once again try to negotiate with Jabba, and then he tried to shoot the slug in the face. I don't know if they all lucked out being executed on the sail barge where R2 happened to be stationed, or maybe some of Lando's time undercover gave them the intelligence to know the Sarlacc was Jabba's favorite form of execution. Basically, I think the plan was to give Jabba several chances to let Han go, but each of the Hutt's denials took the group one step closer to the endgame I'm sure they knew was likely: a full-on battle. How did Luke get his green kyber crystal? The Charles Soule run of Star Wars comics is currently answering that exact question, so we don't have the full story yet, but this is what we know so far. After losing his father's lightsaber, Luke Skywalker found a replacement in the form of an old yellow Temple Guard lightsaber. It eventually became damaged and unreliable, so the young Jedi decided it was time to learn to build his own. On his quest, he met a kyber crystal expert named Dr. Kuwata, who offered Luke 2 crystals, one red and one clear. He meditated on the clear crystal, formed a bond with it, and it turned green. Although it's not yet fully confirmed, I would assume that's the crystal he uses to build his lightsaber as shown in deleted scenes for Return of the Jedi. In Star Wars Legends, Luke created his green crystal through instructions found in Obi-Wan Kenobi's hut. That story was told in Shadows of the Empire, but synthetic lightsaber crystals have been largely left out of new canon stories. Who survived the sail barge explosion? We know from the Book of Boba Fett that Bib Fortuna and Max Rebo made it out. Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view tells us Bib was thrown from the blast into the sand. He awoke to find a surviving Gamorrean guard attempting to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Maybe that was one of Bib's guards also seen in the Book of Boba Fett. From a certain point of view also tells us that most of the Max Rebo band made it out alive. Joe Yowza escaped on a spare sand skiff, leaving Max to die, but Max, Droopy McCool, and Size Noodles still made it to safety from the explosion. I would say that Salacious Crumb is also a brief survivor of the sail barge. The blast tossed him out of a window, but he landed in the Great Pit of Carkoon, so his survival was short-lived. And of course, Boba Fett made it out of the battle, but he was in the Sarlacc when the explosion happened.
Rise, my friend.
Who are the Emperor's advisors? They were bureaucratic allies of Palpatine's that held a number of responsibilities. Some were purely political and served on the Imperial ruling council, but some seemed fully aware of their leader's true identity as Darth Sidious. Yup Tashu from the Aftermath trilogy of books definitely knew. Minister Hyden from Star Wars Rebels probably knew as well. The 6 advisors who joined the Emperor on the second Death Star were Janis Grijatis, Sima Lu, Sate Pestage, Ars Dangor, Kryn Blista Vinay, and Pebamaris Zorn. Grijatis and Alu were known to search the galaxy for Sith artifacts, so they likely knew about Darth Sidious, like Tashu and Hyden. All 6 of the advisors on the second Death Star perished in its explosion. Yup Tashu played a major role in the Galactic Empire for the year following the Battle of Endor, helping to orchestrate the Battle of Jakku, which nearly saw the annihilation of Imperial and New Republic forces.
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not,
Did Yoda really teach Jedi for 800 years? This question has become more prevalent after we met Grogu, who is still a baby at the age of 50, so that timing now seems kind of strange. Does Yoda's species hit a massive growth spurt at the age of 60 or something? Maybe, we don't know how they age. Maybe their version of puberty is really intense, but they come out the other side very wise and ready to teach. But I think it's more likely that Yoda is exaggerating. I think it's reasonable that Yoda could have become a Jedi Knight by the age of 190 or maybe even earlier. Then he could have taken on a Padawan shortly after, marking his first time training a Jedi. That gives him 700 plus years of teaching. Using Han Solo's not if you round up rules, sure, Yoda taught Jedi for 800 years, give or take. Yoda probably made that number bigger every time he made that claim. First it was 500 years, then 600, no 7, no 800 years.
When gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be?
Was Luke really the last Jedi after Yoda's death? Obviously not, since we've learned of other Jedi survivors out in the galaxy like Ahsoka Tano, Baylan Skoll, Ezra Bridger, and Cal Kestis might still be running around somewhere. So what gives, Yoda? Why are you lying to Luke like that? Well, Yoda's actual line is that Luke will be the last of the Jedi, not the last. In 1983, I absolutely think that's how the line was meant to be interpreted, but since then, things have changed. Even George Lucas had plans to bring more Jedi survivors into the story in his proposed sequel movies, but still, I think the spirit of Yoda's words rings true. First, he's simply trying to motivate Luke in his coming fight to save the galaxy. He's not trying to lore dump all over him. What's more is all those Jedi I mentioned should have an asterisk next to their names on the list of surviving Jedi. At the time of Return of the Jedi, Ahsoka didn't consider herself a Jedi, and says as much in Star Wars Rebels. Baylan Skoll had fallen to the dark side, Ezra Bridger was missing, and we don't know the full story of Cal Kestis yet. So Luke might as well have been the last Jedi. When did the Mon Calamari fleet join the rebellion? Admirals Akbar and Raddus were already part of the Rebel Alliance by the time of the battles of Scarif and Yavin, but the rest of Mon Cala and its shipyards were under Imperial rule for about another year. Luke Skywalker and his friends attempted to rescue their king, Li Char, who had been imprisoned by the Empire for nearly 2 decades. He delivered a stirring speech to his people before passing away, which rallied them to rise up against the Empire, liberating their shipyards and several complete capital ships. Shortly after, the growing rebel fleet gathered in secret at Mako Ta, but a traitor gave the Empire their location, and many of the ships were destroyed along with several members of Alliance High Command. So the fleet had to take some time to build back up once again over the course of the following 3 years until the Battle of Endor.
Someone must have told him about my little maneuver at the Battle of Taanab.
What was the Battle of Taanab? We don't have a ton of details in canon, so I'll use Star Wars Legends sources to answer this one. Shortly after the destruction of the first Death Star, Lando was in the Taanab system, which suffered from regular pirate raids. Lando happened to be delivering some cargo at the time and made a bet with some fellow freighter pilots that he could fight off the pirates. He did so by launching devices called Connor nets, which could short out ship systems when activated. Lando caught them by surprise, and the small Taanab defense force rallied behind his minor success to destroy or disable the remaining pirate fleet. He won the deed to a brewery in his bet. We don't have the full story in canon yet. Reference material still mention the same pirates, but also place the event in between the rescue of Han Solo and the Battle of Endor, which seems unlikely to me.
The Emperor's made a critical error and the time for our attack has come.
How did the Rebel Alliance find out about the second Death Star? Shortly after the events of The Empire Strikes Back, the criminal syndicate Crimson Dawn re-emerged in the galaxy with hopes of taking down Darth Sidious. Their leader and Han Solo's former lover, Kira, activated several secret Crimson Dawn agents hidden within the Galactic Empire. Their orders were simply to cause chaos. Two of them worked on the construction of the second Death Star and fled the battle station, hoping to get word of its existence to the rebellion. They were chased across the galaxy to Coruscant, where they were rescued by none other than Luke Skywalker, who heard their distress call. They told Luke what they knew about the new superweapon, who passed the information along to Mon Mothma.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
What did the Bothan spies really steal? There is a major misconception that the Bothans were responsible for stealing the plans to the second Death Star, but the dialogue in Return of the Jedi specifically states the Bothans gave the rebels 4 key pieces of information: the second Death Star's exact location, its weapon systems weren't yet operational, it was relatively undefended, and the fact that the Emperor was personally overseeing its completion. Nothing about the second Death Star's plans are mentioned in the movie. However, I should point out that in Star Wars Legends, Shadows of the Empire does tell the story of Luke Skywalker, Dash Rendar, and some Bothans stealing the plans for the second Death Star together after they learn of its existence from Black Sun. And I should point out that in both continuities, the Bothans were allowed to get all of this information by the Emperor. He wanted them to know where it was, and that he would be there, so the rebels would send an all-or-nothing attack where they would be trapped by heavy defenses and a fully operational battle station.
We have stolen a small Imperial shuttle.
Where did the Rebel Alliance get their stolen Imperial shuttle? Shortly before the events of Return of the Jedi, the Rebellion became increasingly worried that the Empire would discover their fleet gathering around the planet Sullust. Leia offered herself up as a distraction, a high-priority target that could keep the Empire busy chasing her instead of searching for the fleet. As seen in the book Moving Target, she and a handful of rebels bounced around the Outer Rim until they were briefly captured and taken aboard the Star Destroyer Shield Maiden, but allies of Leia's came to her aid and attacked her captors, allowing her to escape. She did so in a stolen Imperial shuttle called Tidarium. Star Wars Legends told 2 completely different versions of the shuttle's theft in 2 different X-Wing based video games. X-Wing Alliance had a mission revolving around stealing Tidarium from Outpost 327 in the Tsar system. 1 year later, Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader followed Wedge Antilles as he stole the shuttle. This was later rationalized to say that the Empire had reclaimed the shuttle, forcing the rebels to steal it a second time.
What is thy bidding, my master?
What else is in the Emperor's throne room? Located on the second Death Star's North Pole and standing at 100 stories tall, the tower was constructed to resemble Palpatine's seat of power on Coruscant, the Imperial Palace and former Jedi Temple. The spire was divided into 4 sections. One was a simple docking tube for Imperial shuttles or other smaller vessels. On the opposite side of that was a holographic map and tactical room. Opposite the throne room were Palpatine's living quarters. It was a red-colored office modeled after his offices as both Chancellor of the Republic and leader of the Empire. Behind that were sleeping quarters that monitored Palpatine's health. Finally, the throne room itself was home to a modest chair, a massive window, and a nearby vault that housed a wayfinder used to reach the hidden Sith world Exegol.
I do believe they think I am some sort of god.
Why did the Ewoks immediately worship C-3PO in Return of the Jedi? Was it just because he was gold and shiny? Well, kind of, yeah. The Ewoks worshipped a god they called the Golden One, who was responsible for bringing light and therefore life to their moon. This was first established in the Return of the Jedi novelization, as well as canon sources like Tales from Vader's Castle and the Myths and Fables book. Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view tells us a story about Logray, the Ewok shaman, who struggled to maintain the faith of his people. After the Empire arrived and began wreaking havoc on their home, the Ewoks feared the Golden One had abandoned them, so the sudden appearance of a droid matching the description of their deity was a very welcome sight for the citizens of Bright Tree Village.
3PO, tell them they must be set free.
Where did the Ewoks get a dress for Leia? I think it makes enough sense that someone in Bright Tree Village could have sewn something together quickly. Someone has to make all their little hoods, why can't they just make a dress too? But it's also become a fan theory that the dress may have belonged to another human woman at some point. The made-for-TV Ewok movies took place 1 year before the events of Return of the Jedi and featured the Tawani family crash landing on the forest moon of Endor. They didn't stay there long before escaping or dying, but it's possible the Ewoks made a dress for Kataryn, the matriarch of the family. The Caravan of Courage and the Battle for Endor are both considered Star Wars legends now, but many elements of the movies have been brought into canon, and LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga even featured a Tawani family portrait hidden in Bright Tree Village.
She was very beautiful.
How does Leia remember her mother? At the time of writing Return of the Jedi, George Lucas had in his mind that Luke and Leia's mother was still alive after their birth. Earlier versions of the script state that Obi-Wan sent both Leia and their mother away to better hide them from the Emperor, but the mother died shortly after, and then Leia was adopted by the Organas on Alderaan. Of course, now we know that Padme died giving birth to Luke and Leia, so how do we reconcile this? I think it all comes down to the Force. Leia is strong in the Force, even if she doesn't know it. She has images and feelings not just of her mother's face, but of who she was and what she was feeling. I would say this is backed up by the memories Obi-Wan says he has of his own family, despite being taken to the Jedi Temple when he was very young. Hey! Is the bearded rebel at the Battle of Endor actually the clone Rex? Officially, I would say no. At a screening for the Star Wars Rebels Season 2 finale, Dave Filoni first suggested the idea that the character originally known as Nick Sant could have been Rex instead. The Star Wars Rebels series finale confirmed that Rex did fight at the Battle of Endor, but in a new interview, Filoni walked back on his speculation, saying he didn't want to explicitly replace a previously existing Star Wars character with Rex. That said, a Galaxy of Adventures short on the official Star Wars Kids YouTube channel did replace Nick Sant with Rex, complete with bits of his clone armor, so there is still kind of a link between the two characters. I think this is another case of simply choosing whatever you personally prefer. To quote Filoni one more time, he said, "I didn't want to lay it down in stone one way or the other. If that is Rex, is not Rex. For some people it's fun to believe it is Rex, and some people don't want to believe it's Rex, and I'm fine either way with that, and I think I left it in a state where you could believe one way or the other."
Red Leader standing by.
Why does Wedge Antilles report in as Red Leader instead of Rogue Leader? What happened to Rogue Squadron after The Empire Strikes Back? The answer to this is actually found in the From a Certain Point of View book for Episode 5 and not 6. The short story Rendezvous shows what the Rebel fleet did while Luke and Leia were off on their own adventures. In their absence, Wedge was promoted to Flight Commander and tasked with reforming Rogue Squadron. But after losing Zev Seneska and Hobby Clivian in the Battle of Hoth, Wedge found it too painful to reuse their call signs so quickly. Instead, he decided to go back to using Red Squadron, and some of the pilots that joined the flight group, like Grizz Fricks, remained with him until the Battle of Endor. But Rogue Squadron didn't fade away. They still undertook specialized missions from General Hera Syndulla after the Battle of Endor as seen in the video game Star Wars Squadrons.
Lock S-files and attack positions.
Why don't we see B-Wings very much during the Battle of Endor? According to ILM effects artist Bill George in the book The Making of Return of the Jedi, he said the B-Wing was originally going to be featured in more shots, but its wings were too thin and would disappear against the blue screen. So basically, the ship was too thin for the limitations of visual effects in the 80s. There was no digital model of the B-Wing, it had to be created as a physical model shot on a blue screen and then composited into the final shot. Its thin frame apparently made it difficult to capture the footage needed, but you can still find some deleted footage of B-Wing pilots that was shot for the film. A Solistan pilot named Tin Num and a Mon Calamari pilot can both be found in behind-the-scenes footage. Why is the B-Wing called a B-Wing? X and Y-Wings resemble their letters, even the A-Wing is at least vaguely triangular, but the B-Wing doesn't look like a B at all. During production for Return of the Jedi, 2 new Rebel fighters were created and simply labeled A-Fighter and B-Fighter. Visual effects artist Bill George had a lot of input on the B-Fighter, and it received the nickname the Bill Wing. Star Wars Legends eventually called the ship the Blade Wing for its sword-like appearance in attack mode. The Star Wars Rebels episode Wings of the Masters brought the name into canon, so we can assume the B stands for Blade.
Strike me down with all of your hatred.
Why did Darth Vader stop Luke from killing the Emperor? Didn't he want to rule the galaxy as father and son? I think this is open to audience interpretation. Maybe Vader was saving Luke's soul, or maybe he was just that loyal to the Emperor. My guess is the latter. The Darth Vader comics by Greg Pak take place in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi and show Vader's several attempts to defeat Darth Sidious. Of course they all fail, no matter what he tries. When he tells Luke on Endor that he doesn't know the power of the dark side and that he must obey his master, I think he truly believes that. I don't think Vader believes the Emperor can be defeated and the best outcome for him is to remain a Sith apprentice. So protecting Palpatine in that moment is like him proving his loyalty because he knows he can't beat his master in a fight. Of course, the irony is that brute strength doesn't defeat the Emperor, an act of compassion for someone else does. Why do Ewoks have a bunch of log traps constructed and ready to go? Did they build them specifically for ATSTs? No, they actually built their log traps to fight off a massive creature called the Gorax. Those huge predators were created in concept art for Return of the Jedi and were fully realized in the Ewoks Caravan of Courage made-for-TV movie. They've since appeared in canon stories like Tales from Vader's Castle, and one episode of Forces of Destiny showed the Ewoks joining forces with Luke and Leia to defeat a Gorax with log traps not long after the Battle of Endor and the destruction of the second Death Star. So no, the traps weren't hastily built to fight the Empire, they were just conveniently already made to fight off another kind of giant.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
Did Darth Vader or the Emperor know Luke was trained by Yoda? In the final cut of the movie, I would say the answer is unclear. Vader only ever claims that Obi-Wan taught Luke well, or that Obi-Wan's failure was complete. But jumping into the original novelization, there's a scene where the Emperor reads Luke's mind and discovers the name Yoda in his thoughts. What's interesting is that the Emperor seemed to have no clue who this Yoda person was. Of course, we now know the Sith Lord knew the Jedi Grandmaster well during the time of the Clone Wars. So Palpatine may have suspected that Yoda was still out there, and maybe he thought he helped Luke out, but there's nothing to say for sure in the movie itself. Could Darth Vader use Force lightning? I think this is up for debate and expect exactly that to happen in the comments, but I would go with yes. Technically, he could use Force lightning. Should he? No. That would not be a good idea for someone living in a biomechanical suit. In my opinion, he would have been able to channel lightning through his cybernetic fingers if he chose to. The Force is about belief and visualization. One of my favorite examples of this is Dagan Gera fighting with both of his hands despite only physically having one arm. He can visualize the arm he lost, so he still fights like it's there. I have no trouble believing that Darth Vader could use Force lightning in theory. It would probably be more difficult for him to visualize and believe it could happen, and then if he did pull it off, it very well might be the last thing he ever did. In the Star Wars Legends book, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Vader creates a ball of white energy to attack Luke. The comic adaptation of the story illustrates the energy as something that definitely appears like Force lightning, but I don't think we will ever see Darth Vader use Force lightning in canon. Were the blue flames seen during the Emperor's death a sign of Sith alchemy? To me, this answer is all down to headcanon. Personally, I think it was just a massive explosion of energy that looked cool and, ironically at the time, was probably meant to show how super duper definitely dead the Emperor was. See? He exploded! It's just like Darth Maul getting cut in half. Super dead guy right there. But we now know that Palpatine lived on in both canon and Star Wars Legends, so I see absolutely no harm in claiming those blue flames as foreshadowing for the return of Darth Sidious. I've never seen anything to suggest a direct connection in another book or comic or anything, but I've also never seen anything to disprove it. So if you like that idea, I say believe it all you want. What happened to the debris of the second Death Star? I think Robot Chicken really brought this question to the forefront, but it does make sense that a massive space station might rain down destruction on the Ewoks. But don't worry, most of the second Death Star was straight up vaporized. Some of the debris remained in orbit above the forest moon as seen in Battlefront 2, but any remaining wreckage that may have posed a danger to the Ewoks was intercepted. The Rebel fleet deployed shields and tractor beams to stop any debris from devastating the moon. But I guess nobody bothered to protect the ocean moon of Endor, Kef Bir, since at least one giant chunk landed there. In Star Wars Legends, Imperial remnant propaganda tried to claim the rebels simply let the remains of the Death Star fall, but it was well known to be a lie.
He's my brother.
How did Han react to learning Luke and Leia were siblings? The book The Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis has a good scene of Han reflecting over the year he missed frozen in carbonite, thinking of Luke and how far he'd come from the farm boy he met on Tatooine. He recognized the jealousy he once shared of Luke and his connection with Leia. He realized how deeply their connection truly was, and then he remembered what happened between them on Hoth. Luke asks Han what he's thinking about, and he says, "Just remember that time after the Wampa attack?" The exact memory came back to Luke as well, and the two friends agreed to never speak of that moment again. Was the Battle of Endor the end of the Galactic Civil War? No, the official surrender didn't occur until 1 year later at the Battle of Jakku. However, stories like The Rise of Skywalker and Ahsoka have both talked about Endor as if it were the final battle. I would argue that the Battle of Endor was the beginning of the end for sure. I could also see the New Republic choosing to celebrate that fight over the Battle of Jakku for political propaganda. Jakku was a ruse meant to destroy both New Republic and Imperial forces in one fell swoop. It failed in that regard and ended in Imperial defeat, but it wasn't as decisive as the Battle of Endor, which saw the destruction of the second Death Star and the deaths of the Emperor and Darth Vader. I could see New Republic history books making a much bigger deal out of Endor, even if Jakku was the official final battle. What happened to Cloud City after the Battle of Endor? The end of Return of the Jedi shows a bunch of celebrating, but that didn't last long. The Imperial Governor Adelhard set up what became known as the Iron Blockade. He shut down communications in the Innoit sector that included Bespin and Cloud City, claiming that the destruction of the second Death Star and the Emperor's death were falsified rebel propaganda. Several rebel sympathizers rose up against the Empire and were aided by the return of Lando Calrissian and Lobot. The Iron Blockade was eventually broken, and Cloud City was liberated less than a year after the Battle of Endor. What happened to Coruscant after the Battle of Endor? The movie shows us celebrations taking place in Monument Plaza as citizens tear down a statue of the Emperor. Stormtroopers arrived shortly after and opened fire on the crowd. Coruscant remained under Imperial control for the following year, with Mas Amedda serving as a puppet leader imprisoned in the Imperial Palace. Several young rebels were able to break Amedda out of captivity, possibly with the help of an old Coruscant diner owner named Dexter Jetster. After the Imperial defeat at the Battle of Jakku, Amedda was able to address the New Republic and offer his official surrender, bringing an end to the Galactic Civil War. Did the Ewoks eat humans? Oh, 100%. We can see they were going to cook Han Solo in honor of C-3PO. Tons of jokes have been made since then about rebels at the Ewok party wondering what they were eating, and some stories, like Alyssa Wong's Wolf Trap in Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View, have explicitly shown the horror of Imperials who were captured by the Ewoks and waiting to be eaten. A Forces of Destiny short also shows Leia convincing several Ewoks to not cook and eat stormtroopers, so the Ewoks definitely didn't have a problem eating humans. I doubt cooked stormtrooper was actually served at the celebration at the end of Return of the Jedi, though, despite all the jokes. I think that's an unnecessarily dark spin to put on the rebel victory. Why does Anakin Skywalker get to become a Force ghost? Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars made it clear that retaining your consciousness after death was only available to the light side of the Force and took specific training that Darth Vader certainly never received. Well, a major part of that training is facing and overcoming the darkest parts of yourself, something Anakin Skywalker had very recently done himself. But the story Brotherhood by Mike Chen in Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View goes into another part of that training, surrendering to the Force. One of Anakin's downfalls was his inability to let go of control. In his quest to stop Padme from dying, he fell to the dark side and made his visions come true. As Anakin died, he felt the urge for his spirit to remain at any cost. Once again, to control the Force, to allow him to stay so he could heal all the damage he had caused as Darth Vader. But within the cosmic Force, Obi-Wan spoke to Anakin and convinced his friend to allow the next generation, his children, to heal the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker finally let go of his need for control. He technically did complete the training required of him, and his Force Ghost manifested alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda's. Okay, but why does Anakin's Force Ghost get to look younger than Obi-Wan's? We don't have an official answer for this, although Dave Filoni has teased that George Lucas told him the reason. I believe it was Anakin subconsciously manifesting himself in the light side. He only ever looked like Sebastian Shaw when he was Darth Vader, but Anakin Skywalker looked like Hayden Christensen. The story Brotherhood by Mike Chen in Return of the Jedi from a Certain Point of View shows that Anakin didn't choose to appear that way or to wear classic Jedi robes, it just happened. I think it's because deep down, that's how Anakin wanted to remember himself. That said, the book Shadow of the Sith has also presented Anakin's Force Ghost looking older, so that version of the character after death does still exist. I see no reason why Force Ghosts couldn't present themselves however they want, whenever they want. But for Anakin's first time, he manifested himself as the last time he saw himself as a hero. Could Sith become Force Ghosts? No, at least not in the way that we see Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda at the end of Return of the Jedi. Sith are determined to collect and cling to power however they define it. Political status, wealth, strength, or whatever else they value. It's their inability to let go and surrender to the Force that prevents them from becoming a Force Ghost after death. But we have seen plenty of examples of Sith who either survived mortal wounds through sheer rage and will, like Darth Maul, or we've seen Sith who have died physical deaths, but their spirits have lingered on within their possessions, like Darth Momin continuing to inhabit his helmet and being able to influence or even take control of the people who were near it. The Sith form of life after death is limited and weak when compared to the freedom allowed by a Jedi who truly became one with the cosmic force. And okay, here's one more bonus question because it's my question. It's not frequently asked, but I need it answered. Why are there only 3 dots at the end of the crawl for Return of the Jedi? Every other Star Wars crawl has 4 dots. Why does Return of the Jedi only have 3? I'm sure it was just an oversight back in 1983, but why can't we fix it? If we can add an entire beak to the Sarlacc pit or put Hayden Christensen in the movie, surely we can add an extra dot to the crawl so it matches the other movies. I just don't get it. But that brings us to the end of the 40 most frequently asked questions I've seen about Return of the Jedi. I'm sure there are more great questions I missed, so leave yours in the comments. If you liked this video, check out the ones I've already done answering 40 frequently asked questions from A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. I'm also hard at work on The Phantom Menace and the rest of the prequels right now. Make sure you catch those by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, following us on our socials, and please consider checking out our Patreon page for even more Star Wars talk. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.